The other day, I went to the Fort Rucker Public Library. I didn't go there to check anything out or go look in their books for sale section. I stopped by because the Fort Rucker Public Library was very much a hub of my childhood, especially middle school and high school years. I wanted to see if when I walked in, I felt like that would be a topic worthy of a Nostalgia Talk episode. And the second I walked in, I knew it would be. I hadn't set foot in that library probably since I was in high school, and I graduated in 1995. So it had been almost, 30 years since I'd walked into that building, and it had slick new furniture and shelves, and things had been moved around, and it had sections that it didn't have when I was there in the 90s. You could check out board games now and video games. So things had been moved around, the furniture was different, it was modernized, but two things had not changed at that library. The first was, the footprint, the floor plan, the way the building is shaped. There's not much you can do about that. So the bathrooms are still in the same place, and the checkout desk is still in the same place, but the dimensions are pretty much all the same. But the other thing that didn't change from the moment I walked into that door, and I bet some of you who are listening right now already know the answer. What was it that hadn't changed from the moment I walked in the door? You could have put a blindfold on me. It was the smell. Libraries all sort of have that smell. And this one in particular had its very particular library smell. And the moment I walked in, I was like, yeah, this is a Nostalgia Talk waiting to happen. So I thought back on my memories of the library, particularly the one on Fort Rucker. And they do start in 1990. When we got back from Germany, we spent a summer down here at Fort Rucker, Alabama. My mom, not wanting to put up with us being rambunctious all summer, would find things to do and places to take us. And of course, we were on a budget. So one of the places that we would go on a mildly regular basis was the Fort Rucker Public Library. I can still remember the first two books I checked out in the summer of 1990. I checked out Stephen King's Pet Sematary, and I checked out Quick Change, which was a novel that had been turned into a movie featuring Bill Murray. My parents always had a rule that if I would read the novel, then I could see the movie. We knew that Pet Sematary was pretty scary and Stephen King and rated R, so I knew they weren't too keen on letting me see that, but they would not mind if I read the book. This is how they encouraged reading. So that summer I terrified myself reading Pet Sematary and the paperback, and then lifted my spirits a little bit by reading the novelization of Quick Change. Well, that's not exactly fair. It's not the novelization of the movie. It was a book first, and then it got turned into a movie. So it is slightly different. It lacks the Bill Murray-ism. But anyway, I just remember reading those two books that summer, and I was only about 13, 14 years old. So those are pretty hefty books for a kid that age, but I read them because, we didn't have a lot to do, and I enjoyed it. The library was very much a refuge for us. In Alabama, it gets really hot and humid in the summer, and thunderstorms tend to come through. So the library was a nice, cool, quiet place where you could spend some time and out of the hot sun, out of the mugginess. So that was nice. I can even remember walking from our little apartment to the library with my brother one summer, and it was a hike. It was probably a 5 to 6 mile walk, but we didn't have anything to do that day, so we did a 5 to 6 mile walk and enjoyed the cool air conditioning of the public library, the Fort Rucker Public Library. And then we moved away. We got a different assignment in North Carolina, and I'm certain I made use of the library there too. But the Fort Rucker one in Alabama always had a special place in my heart, because after that we moved back to Fort Rucker, and it became my sort of library of choice for my high school years. When we moved back, we lived on base, which meant I only lived about 2 miles away. So it was still a good hot and humid walk or bike ride in the summers to go to that nice, cool, quiet place and enjoy a summer day in there reading books. And I also remember going back in high school. That's when I discovered they had the books for sale cart. Most libraries will sell some books that they want to take out of circulation. And that's where I first discovered that the Fletch, the Chevy Chase movies, Fletch, like there's a whole series of those novels. I think they're written by Greg McDonald. There was a Fletch novel on this cart, and I went, oh, I didn't realize that this was a book series first. So I got the book Fletch and the Man Who, and I read that. More importantly, I discovered it was a great place to find audio cassettes and books on cassette and radio shows on cassette. Being a teenager in the 90s, music's a big part of your life. We don't have instant downloads or anything like that. So anytime you can find music, especially free, wow, you take that, right? So I checked out a lot of audio cassettes. I remember checking out a few Prince albums there. I'm still a huge Prince fan to this day. It's my favorite. And a lot of those early Prince albums that I checked out, I literally checked out from the library. Like I said, books on cassette. I remember getting a couple more Stephen King books on cassette that I would play in the little boombox in my room and listen to. I remember getting Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on cassette, and I would put that in my little Walkman. I'd put my little headphones on when I'd go to bed at night, and I'd listen to the story until I faded off and fell asleep. And the next day I'd have to kind of rewind and figure out where it was that I drifted off so I could continue it. And I'd probably listen to 10 or 15 minutes every night before I drifted to sleep until I finished an audiobook like that. Those are just, warm and comforting memories for me. And radio shows, if you are a fan of the LONGBOX CRUSADE Network in general, we cover Sherlock Holmes radio shows. And this is where my love of that really blossomed. Now, Jason and I had a couple on cassette when we were kids, but this is where they had a whole bunch. They had a lot of Sherlock Holmes, which are the ones I tend to gravitate towards. They had some of the Shadow. But that was just another thing that I would put into my little Sony Walkman. For those of you who remember, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Put on my headphones, get into bed at night, listen until I drifted off to sleep. So it was like this really cool secret stash of media content between the music and the books on cassette and the radio shows. It was just a wonderful place to go. I was probably going there on a weekly basis, especially after I went to a store in town called Bud's. For those of you who don't remember Bud's, it was sort of a clearance house for Walmart stuff. Sam Walton owned Walmart, and I think it was his brother Bud Walton who ran the Bud's stores. And I picked up at Bud's a VCP. Now, some of you might be going, do you mean VCR? No, it was a VCP because it did not have a recording function. It was a video cassette player, but it didn't have a recording function. But I had essentially, what would commonly be called a VCR, but it was a VCP. And I had that in my room hooked up to my little 13-inch color television that I'd bought these things using the money that I saved working at the Army Aviation Museum on Fort Rucker. I worked in the gift shop. I saved my money. I bought the little 13-inch TV. Then I bought the VCP. I think I paid $50 for that thing back in 1990. Oh gosh, 94. And that's when I started really using one more thing at the library, which was the VHS tapes. To this day, if you follow me on Twitter or you listen to me talk on podcasts, I still love my VHS tapes. Well, they had a entire, library of them at the library. This opened up a whole new world for me. I didn't have to pay to rent them. I didn't have to go to Blockbuster or Movie Gallery and pay to rent VHS tapes. I could get them for free at the library. And, I love movies, so I went flipping through those, and it really rekindled my love for the James Bond films. My brother and I had several of those on VHS growing up, but Jason was gone, and I think he took the Bond tapes with him, or maybe my parents kept them. Anyway, I didn't have my own James Bond on VHS, and I found them there, so I started going through and watching all the Bonds they had. And that was a comfort zone for me. And I podcast about James Bond to this day. And I think if I didn't have that library access where I was rewatching them all the time, I might not have that. Might have gone with a different path. The other thing I distinctly remember discovering in those VHSs, and I watched a lot of obscure things and stuff like that, but I distinctly remember that was my introduction to Bruce Lee films. Clearly, you can't be a child of the 80s and not have heard of Bruce Lee. Of course, we all heard of him, but I'd never really gotten a chance to sit down and watch his films. There was quite a few of them. He didn't do a ton of films, but there was a good handful of them available at the Fort Rucker Library. I distinctly remember the first one I watched was Fists of Fury which its original title was The Big Boss, but I only knew it as Fist of Fury because that's what was on the little box when I got it from the library, and I never even really dipped a toe into a lot of Asian kung fu cinema like that before. So that was like mind-blowing to me. I was like, okay, this is that Bruce Lee stuff that we all talked about as kids and emulated, but I've never seen it. So I watched that. I watched The Chinese Connection, well, what we call The Chinese Connection, and I think Enter the Dragon. So it was just like this whole new thing for me. Like I discovered this whole new movie universe that I'd never really been into before, and it was very exciting. And again, if it wasn't for the Fort Rucker Public Library, I might never have experienced that. So those are my strongest memories of that library, and they just all came flooding back a couple of weeks ago when I walked into that building. And I looked around, and the layout wasn't terribly familiar, but as soon as I took in that first breath and just smelled that library smell, all those memories came flooding back, and I was like, oh gosh, yes, I need to do a nostalgia talk on this, because I know there's people out there that spent summers in libraries like I did, and I think that might be a thing that's going away. It makes me a little sad for the youth. I've got a 16, almost 17-year-old son, and I've never seen him head off to the library. Everything's online now. You can find the books you want, the movies you want, and the music you want right there online. So people don't really go to the library as a sort of this center of entertainment, or even if it's just a refuge from hot summer days. Like, people just don't really do that anymore. And it makes me a little sad because, on the one hand, looking at it through the lens of my teenage son, it's great that he has access to the things he wants. If he wants to hear a song, he can go to YouTube or Spotify or whatever and find a song. If he wants to read a book, the books are available digitally. If he wants to see a movie, same thing, streaming, like everything is there. And so as a matter of convenience, I think that's amazing. It's something we never really thought of very much when we were kids in the 1990s going to the library. But I think the part that makes me sad is by going to the library, you got exposed to things that you might never have found. And the more I think about it, like if I hadn't gone to the library, would I have ever discovered the Bruce Lee films? Would I have really entrenched my love of James Bond? I would never have discovered that the Fletch movies were based on novels and that there's a bunch of different ones. So it's sort of that going to another location, a library that has all these things that allows you to browse, to look around, going through those music cassettes, those old radio shows. Like I would never have discovered just the magic of being a teenager with Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in my ears doing radio shows as I fell asleep. That is just such a wonderful and positive memory for me. And I never would have discovered that if I didn't have the ability to go browse and find it. So to me, that's the downside of living in our technology, everything's available world, is I don't know that we browse as much anymore or find those things. Like I never would have read the book version of Quick Change. I saw it on the shelf and I went, hey, that's a Bill Murray movie that I've been wanting to see. Let me, see if it's the same thing. And of course it had the clown on the cover. Oh, okay. So, the power of browse and the public library, and just looking back, and you can hear it in my voice, just the pure, amazement, excitement, happiness that is in me because of the time I spent at the library. That's the part that makes me sad about sort of the internet era. Again, pluses and minuses. It's great to be able to just go find what you need, but the whole browse, the whole experience, the smell of a library, I wish that for my sons, although I don't know that they'll ever experience it. But you 70s and 80s and 90s folks out there, you know what I'm talking about. In fact, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. I'd love to hear what your memories are around your public library. What are some things that you discovered that are still a part of you simply because you went to that library and, browsed, looked around, and found things you never would have found if you hadn't have gone? I'd love to hear that. So please sound off in the comments. A lot of you folks send me private messages and stuff around these nostalgia talks, and I really appreciate that, man. That you don't know. Just hearing the comments and getting that feedback and sharing those experiences, it means a ton to me. Because right now I'm just a guy talking into a microphone, just kind of pouring out a piece of his heart, something that just from my youth I'll never get back, but I hold it so dear. And when you guys share those with me, it makes it even better. So by all means, drop a comment on this YouTube video, or if you're listening to the podcast version, drop a comment. Any of our Longbox Crusade outlets, we're on social media. You can find us at Longbox Crusade on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and of course here on YouTube as well. So lots of ways to get in touch with us, to let us know how you feel, share your memories. I love talking about this stuff, so definitely give that a shot. Or you can, of course, reach out to me personally. I am at Yard Sale Artist. That is Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's all at Yard Sale Artist. You can check out my artwares at www.theyardsaleartist.com. But most of all, I want to thank you for indulging me in another nostalgia talk. I hope it brought back great memories of public libraries for you. Again, I'd love to hear them. But thanks so much for joining me, listening to mine, and I will see you guys again on another day where we will take another walk down another branch of memory lane.
This episode features the copyright-free music track Snowfall by Scott Buckley.